Starting with verse 15. How we doing there? You guys remember that first class, right, where we said the first 5 books of the Bible are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So the 5th book of the Bible is where we're at. You got it? Chapter 30, verse 15. Okay, it's page 208 for those that are struggling a little bit. So page 208 is where we are. And then we'll actually do page 17 in your little blue book for the prayer. We'll do an act of love, that prayer, the act of love in your little blue book. All right. Ready to rock and roll? So we are at Deuteronomy 30:15 and following. See, I have today set before you life and good, death and evil. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, with which I am giving you today, loving the Lord your God and walking in his ways and keeping his commandments, statutes, and ordinances, you will live and grow numerous, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to possess. If, however, your heart turns away and you do not obey, but are led astray and bow down to other gods and serve them, I tell you today that you will certainly perish. You will not have a long life on the land which you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. I call heaven and earth today to witness against you. I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Choose life, then, that you and your descendants may live, by loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice, and holding fast to him. For that will mean life for you, a long life for you, to live in the land which the Lord swore to your ancestors, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give to them. And then page 17. An act of love. Oh my God, I love you above all things, with my whole heart and soul, because you are all good and worthy of all love. I love my neighbor as myself for the love of you. I forgive all who have injured me and ask pardon of all whom I have injured. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, so welcome back. Last week we talked about Mary and the saints. This week we've got a big topic to talk about, because we're actually going to try to tackle both a little bit about morality, so basically the Catholic moral law, which is going to be a very basic introduction. We won't be spending a lot of time on morality, because there's a lot of principles to morality that we won't really get into, but just a basic understanding of why we have law and where that idea of moral law comes from. And then we'll talk a little bit about the last things, so typically judgment, heaven, hell, and purgatory is where we're going to go tonight. So first, last week we talked about Mary and the saints. One of the questions in the question box, which I said that I would reference at various times, and I'm not sure which night it came from, so I thought I would go ahead and answer it. The question was, Mary received grace from God so that she wouldn't sin, but if Jesus needed a sinless mother, wouldn't Mary need a sinless mother? And her mom's mom? Why do Catholics believe Mary got that grace instead of it going straight to Jesus? So good question. If it's this understanding that Jesus sort of needed a sinless womb in order to be perfect as he was, that it would also then make sense that didn't Mary also then, and isn't it kind of just reciprocating back infinitely? First of all of the teachings about Mary, as I mentioned last week, ultimately do not point to her grace or her perfection in the sense that it's for her glory, but rather all of the teachings about Mary are there to reveal to us something about Jesus Christ. So the understanding that Mary was perfect and had a perfect womb to carry our Lord was not out of some necessity of like God needed something, because technically to use the phrase God needs, your brain explodes, because that's it's like a paradox. So in the sense of Jesus needing a perfect womb, he didn't need a perfect womb, but the perfect womb is for us, in the sense of being able to understand who he was, to be able to reveal to us better who he was as the Ark of the Covenant, as we talked about last week, the fulfillment of the Ark, the perfect possession of God's presence in the world, as what the Ark was in the Old Testament, so too Mary stands as that perfect vessel to carry the Lord. So it wasn't out of his need, but rather we believe it was out of a way to kind of teach us, to reveal something to us about who he was. And so that's the understanding of the perfection of Mary. Anyway, I don't know if that answers the question or not. If there's anybody have any follow-up questions about anything from last week or comments? Sweet. All right, so what we're going to do is actually watch a 7-minute segment of a video. It's just a very basic introduction into Catholic morality. And then we're going to discuss. So, come back to me, picture. Oh, why do I have a picture? Why did I lose my picture? Picture. Yeah, I probably do need some help, and I appreciate that. My computer savior. I don't know why I lost my picture. Is it talking to you? Yeah, but it wasn't rebooting, but are you asking why did we do that real quick? We should do. That's fine. I mean, we're going to have to, apparently. So meanwhile, the question that often comes up, and this is one of the ones that is going to be presented in the presentation, is the basic understanding of morality as we see it, especially in our world today. We sort of see it as law, rules, in a sense, oppressive rules that try to keep Catholics in line, right? And so the understanding of morality, and specifically law, is not so much to keep us in line out of some Vatican group of old men in Rome to basically keep the church in line, but rather it is much like, and the example that's used actually is it's like when you buy a new car, and when you buy that new car, it comes with a big fat driver's manual. If you flip through that driver's manual, it'll be like, man, there's a lot of rules, a lot of law, a lot of ideas written about how I'm supposed to use this car. Part of that, I think I'm going to skip that now. Too late. We missed our 7-minute video. We better kick up this PowerPoint stuff. Are those going to come up automatically? Apparently. Okay. So we used up our 7 minutes, so no video, sorry. So now I'm just going to talk for 15 minutes instead. So as the manufacturers did, they put little stickers on there to direct you, and you might see, like if you take it to the gas station, this brand new car that you buy, and you open up your gas lid and you look in there, and it says unleaded fuel only. And you might think to yourself, who are they to tell me what to do? I am my own person. I'm not going to follow their rules, their laws. Seriously, 124 issues found? That's awesome. What's that? Okay, that's better. Who are they to tell me what I can and can't do, what I can and can't put into my gas tank? I'm going to put diesel in there. And so you might decide, out of your own free will, to put diesel into that car. And the reality is, their law, their little sticker, their rule about putting only unleaded gas in there is not to hold you down. It's not to repress you. It's there because they're the ones who created the car, and they know the best way to use the car and what's going to help that car to function correctly. And so when you use diesel, you have that freedom to do that, but what you're going to find is you're going to have some serious car problems. And you're not going to get very far. And you're not going to be very happy because you're not using the car the way that it was intended to be used. And so the moral law, in many ways, is the same thing. It is from an understanding from God, revealed to us by God through Jesus Christ and the church, as a means of living according to the way that He has created us to live. We have the freedom to reject it. We have the freedom to choose other, to use things in ways that they weren't intended to be used, but you're going to find that it's going to lead to some problems. And in many ways, in a culture that rejects any kind of objective law, which is where we find ourselves in our American culture in many ways, any objective moral truth, is that we have some serious car problems going on in our culture. Another example is used is, you can use a chainsaw to shave your legs. I mean, you could achieve the removal of hair, I think. I've never seen it done, but it could be achieved. Again, you might run into some problems in the meanwhile when that's happening. Using the things that we have been given according to the way that they are intended to be used leads us to success, leads us to happiness, leads us to fulfillment. Using those same things in a way outside of the way that they have been given to us leads to destruction, leads to disappointment, leads to sadness, and away from the happiness that God desires. So in the same way that we're given boundaries in driving down the highway, and there's paint on the road to keep you within the lines, those lines aren't there to keep you from happiness, from driving anywhere that you desire. Those lines are there for your own safety, to protect you, but also to protect everyone else who's on the road. So much so, again, does the moral law act within our lives. So the freedom that we have, the freedom of will that we have to choose to reject the moral law has been given to us by God. What is that understanding? That's where we get the understanding of sin. The basic understanding of sin is missing the mark. That's where that word comes from, is basically an understanding of missing the mark. It was actually used or still used in archery. So to sin is to miss the mark with your arrow. And that's how we understand it. According to the moral law, the rule of God given to us, when we choose other than the way that God has created us to live, to be, then we miss the mark of how he designed us to be. And that's what sin is. It's typically divided into mortal and venial, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. I actually have the 1 John passage where he's the one who distinguishes this idea of sin that leads to death and then every other sin. And basically that distinction is there to the reality, or this distinction of there being different types of sin is there to show us, to understand that there are sins that are going to sever our relationship with God. Now, all sin is missing the mark. All sin is bad. All sin is turning away from God. But as St. John talks about, there's certain sins that completely bring death to us, to our soul, to our relationship with God. One of the questions that comes up is the distinguishing of those of mortal sin. I'm going to talk about that real quick before we move on. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to pause before we get into sin, because we'll talk a little bit more about that with heaven, hell, and purgatory. So the basic introduction into the understanding of the moral law is that we have been given a design, a way, a path, and that when we choose, that we do have freedom of choice, but freedom is not simply the ability to choose, but freedom also requires certain skills in order to achieve what it is that we desire. And those skills, traditionally by the Catholic Church, are called virtues. That's what the understanding of virtue is it's the means of learning the habit of the way that God has created us, living according to that law. When we do that, it creates within us virtue. And so the opposite, again, missing the mark according to the law of God and doing that habitually over a period of time, is called vice. So to guiding our moral choices of virtue and vice is that traditional word conscience, that every single human being is created with a conscience, and that we have the responsibility to form, to actually allow our conscience to be formed rightly. And that means constantly, daily, learning, understanding the law, learning God's plan for us, and striving to choose rightly. That's how we form our conscience. Some say that the conscience is like the eyes to our soul. And so in the same way, an eye is used. That it's not something that is going to necessarily be damaged in a day's time. So if every day I walk up to Riley in the morning, said, "Hey Riley, good to see you today," and I poked him in the eye, most likely I'm not going to do any long-term damage that day. But if every day, 365 days a year, I met Riley and walked up and said, "Hey Riley," and poked him in the eye, sooner or later there's going to be some serious damage to his eye. And typically in the same way, continuing to make those decisions either according to God's law, virtue, or apart from God's law, vice, we form our conscience through those daily choices. We have a responsibility to form our conscience, and then once our conscience is formed, we have a responsibility to follow our conscience. Those are some of the basic principles, basically, of what is Catholic moral law and why we have it and what it does for us. It is the guiding manual, you might say, the guiding manual for directing us towards happiness, towards God's plan for our life, which is happiness. We're not going to go into the details of like we'll talk a little bit more about like sexual morality next week as we talk a little bit about marriage, and later in the semester, I think we get into it a little bit. So we're not going to go into the specifics of the moral principles tonight, but just a basic introduction into morality. My discussion questions were kind of based upon the video. So just mention something that you liked from the video. Something. So we are going to actually break into small groups. I'm going to have you share not only your name and your major or career, but a rule that you remember. It could be a story of a rule that either helped you or hindered you. So, for example, we had the rule that you had to eat a serving of everything, like at the dinner table. Like even if you didn't like it, you had to try it, like a serving of it. And I hated that rule. And there were actually a number of nights where I sat at the dinner table much longer than everybody else because I was not willing to eat a serving of that food. So that was a rule that I didn't like. And then question number 4 is actually, has your perception of rules changed? Any particular rules? Has your perception of any rules changed from when you were a child? Why or why not? And then to fill in for time, you can speak of one thing that you've learned or still hope to learn in the RCAA process this year. So in this question, has your perception of rules changed from when you were a child? That rule of having to eat everything, my perception of that has changed because now I see that that's actually made me like a lot of foods that I most likely would not have tried. In fact, I hated eating asparagus, but we were always forced to eat asparagus. Now asparagus is my favorite vegetable, actually. So it's just a very happy ending to that story. So anyway, so how many? If we could have a leaders stand, and we'll use you, Brandon, because we only have 5. Is that right? 5. Okay, so we're going to have about at least 8 probably in a group. So you may only just be able to share who you are and your rule. So if you want to grab one of the 5 groups. I didn't turn the microphone on. Was it recording? Okay. Just no sound. Welcome back. So and I blame Pinterest. Just kidding. It existed before Pinterest. But how your day really, you need to come up with some unique ideas for your special day. Anyway, so they're thinking about a lot of these other things rather than the reality of the sacramental nature of what they're encountering in Jesus Christ in that sacrament. Whereas with a funeral, it's a lot harder to avoid God. It's a lot harder to avoid the big questions. It's a lot harder. So when I encounter a funeral, when I encounter the family who has lost their loved one, they are asking, what's next for Dad? What's next for my husband? What's next for whoever has passed away? They are disposed to hearing, receiving, questioning, at least even just questioning God. And so it's a much more opportune time as priests to step in to be that minister in those situations where people are actually looking and asking, where is God in all of this? So anyway, that's really a side note. But that's also one of the things I love about funerals is the beautiful symbolism that's connected into our Catholic faith and sacramental faith, how baptism is so intimately tied to the funeral liturgy. So much so that the Easter candle, which is the big candle that represents Jesus, that was first blessed and lit at the Easter Vigil, which we'll all experience, is then used at the funeral at the head of the casket as that mark of Jesus Christ's presence, that mark of baptism. And then also the first time you came into the church, as you were baptized, for many of us as an infant, you were clothed with a white cloth representing being clothed in Jesus Christ. And so the very last time you enter into the church in a casket, you are clothed with a white cloth, marking the fact that you were baptized. And so it is that white cloth that reminds us being clothed in Jesus Christ in baptism. That's part of the reason why the Catholic Church doesn't allow, like, the American flag to be put on the casket in the church. Now, it's fine going to the seminary. I can't believe, I don't know how many times I've heard people make that mistake, but I don't think I've ever. The seminary, where all the dead people are. So, wow. On the way to the cemetery, it's fine. In the church, we belong to Jesus Christ in the mark of our baptism. So anyway, this little side notes about the funeral liturgy that I think are beautiful. So the reality for all of us is that death will come. And then that question for us as Christians, as believers in Jesus Christ, is what happens after that point. And so that's what we understand as judgment, the description of Jesus Christ as at the end of our life, there is a judgment that happens, that takes place. The book of Revelation describes it as Jesus who is seated upon the throne in heaven. But there's a couple of different ways that we talk about judgment. And the first is a particular judgment. So we'll look at Luke 16. We're not actually going to read it all. I just want to draw our minds to this particular judgment. So Luke 16, 19 to 31, if you can't see that. And so this passage, like I said, we're not going to not read it all, but this passage is the traditional passage of the rich man and Lazarus. So if you're familiar with the story, at the end of life, the rich man had always ignored Lazarus, who was laying outside of his door every day. He ignored him until finally they both die, and Lazarus is drawn to the bosom of Abraham, drawn to the heavenly reality, while the rich man is sent to punishment. And so it's one of the ways that we understand this particular judgment, that each of us at the end of our life receive a particular judgment for us individually according to how we lived, according to whether we lived in Jesus Christ, in relationship with Him, as well as our brothers and sisters in Christ. That's why I started with that act of love before class tonight, the act of love being not only our love of Jesus Christ, but also that love of the great commandment, which is love our neighbor as ourself, is part of our responsibility. So that's the understanding of a particular judgment, is that each of us individually are judged at the end of our earthly life. But then there's also the final judgment, the last judgment, which in a sense is kind of a cumulative judgment at the end of time, that we believe that Jesus Christ will come again. And the image that's used there, the scripture passage, is Matthew 25. So you can turn there. And we're at verse 31. So the judgment of the nations. So this idea as at the end of time, Jesus will come again and will judge all nations, all individuals, and as this passage talks about. So when the Son of Man comes in His glory and all the angels with Him, He will sit upon His glorious throne, and all the nations will be assembled before Him. He will separate them one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep on His right and the goats on His left. Then the King will say to those on His right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. A stranger, and you welcomed me. Naked, and you clothed me. Ill, and you cared for me. In prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer Him and say, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you, naked and clothe you? When did we see you ill or in prison and visit you?" And the King will say to you, "Amen, I say to you, whatever you did for one of these least brothers of mine, you did for me." Then He'll say the same thing to those on His left, the goats, that you didn't do these things, and therefore you will go off to eternal punishment, and the righteous to eternal life. So eternal punishment. So it is this image of being separated at the end of time. Again, it's according to our own judgment, but in the final judgment on a larger scale, kind of a cumulative judgment for both those who have died, but then also a connection for those who have already been judged, who are already in heaven. So that's how your handout. That's the kind of the Catholic understanding of the distinction between the particular judgment and the final judgment, the last judgment. Any questions about that? Right on. Okay, so according to that judgment, so we've got death, judgment, so death after we die, we are judged, and then according to that judgment, we've got heaven. So the first understanding, the reality of heaven, that's actually the painting of the Last Judgment from the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. Sorry, I'm kind of standing in the way for you guys. So the heavenly realities is the victorious in heaven who are seated around the throne of God in terms of the book of Revelation. One distinction I will make is about heaven is sometimes we have this image of the saints as being individuals, and I talked about the saints last week as only being those who have been declared by the church as being in heaven. But actually, saint simply comes from the word sanctus, which means holy, and that all individuals who enter heaven are saints. So when you die, if you go to heaven, you are a saint. That's the understanding of the word. You are holy. But then there's sort of the capital C or capital S saint, canonized saint, declared as in heaven by the church, and worthy of imitation, basically, according to their action, their lives committed to Jesus Christ. So, yeah, that clarification, first of all, that all who go to heaven are saints. So if you go to heaven, you are a saint. This understanding of heaven is, blessed are the clean of heart. They will see God. Part of the challenge of heaven is that we often have an image of it like this. It's like, just floating on a cloud with a bunch of fat little man babies who are playing instruments. These are really kind of scary. I just like that. I just kind of like that picture, actually. It's not really like they're like. Anyways,
Did you draw that?
I did. I drew that. No. But I think in terms of a contemporary culture, oftentimes the heaven is sort of just like this image of clouds and just like people floating around on clouds. Or it's that image of, we just wait up in heaven on clouds until we get our wings. Okay, that's not how it works. The angels are completely separate from humanity. Humanity's not waiting to get their wings to become an angel. Yeah, I don't know where that started, actually, but anyway, little side note. What is heaven? So I think sadly sometimes it's not a very attractive image of just like floating around for eternity. That doesn't seem that exciting. But the reality of heaven is truly beyond anything we can imagine, spoken of as complete and full unity with God in that eternal exchange of love. Purely being united with God in love. And I know even that doesn't put a concrete understanding upon heaven. And in fact, as soon as we strive to give a definition or a vision of exactly what heaven is, we've missed it. We don't fully know exactly what heaven looks like. In the same way, we don't fully know exactly what hell looks like. A lot of the images of both heaven and hell come to us from Revelation, from the Scriptures. But even those are given to us as a means of striving as human beings to use human language to describe places that are outside of our human experience, outside of human physical boundaries and laws as we understand them. One of those images is the fact that Jesus is in his resurrected body after his resurrection from the dead. And so that body is not bound by physical law in the same way that his natural body was bound. And that's part of the reason, why we see him walking through doors and such, because he's not bound by the same physical law in his resurrected body. Anyway, so we can't fully know. We do know that it seems like pretty awesome. St. Thomas Aquinas was described as having had an opportunity for the beatific vision, and he's one of the greatest of theologians in the history of the church. He and St. Augustine are kind of known as being two of the top theologians as far as their writings and the writings that they had. It was said that not too many months before the end of St. Thomas's life, he was given at Mass this vision of what heaven would be like, a vision of God, the beatific vision. And it said that he came back from that and said, "The end of my labors has come. All that I have written appears to be as so much straw. After the things that have been revealed to me, I can write no more. I have seen things that make my writings like straw." So basically his entire life's work and all of the theological writings that he had written in light of what he had seen were basically worthless or pointless in his understanding because of how grand this vision for him was. So heaven being that life in pure love, in perfection, in purity, in union with God. So, what is hell? This painting gives a little bit of the image of some of the scriptural references. We do hear fire used in the scriptures to speak about hell. We hear of a pit. That's one of the images of hell, is the fires or the pits of hell, and that it's a place of suffering. But what exactly is it? What do we understand it to be, and how do we get there? Oftentimes and this is also through Scripture, we get this sense that, as Jesus was there upon the throne, he separated the sheep from the goats. So it was by God's activity that some were cast off to hell, some were sent to heaven, as by God's action. And so the question naturally comes up as human beings is, does God, God who is all loving, this God who we describe as purely love in his basic definition, send people to this place, cast people to hell? In a very basic way, we would say no. We would say hell is actually God's mercy. What? Hell is God's mercy in the sense that he allows hell because God allows free will. So the reason that hell exists is because free will exists. And with free will comes the ability to reject God. And so God's mercy allows that rejection of himself, and it's not like we have a God who's going to force us in this life to worship him, to follow him. And therefore, that same God is not going to force us for all eternity to be with him. So that free will, in a sense, continues to eternity. And in that sense, hell is our free choice. Is we chose throughout this life to either say yes to God or to reject God. And if we reject him in this life, he allows that continuation of separation from him for eternity. So the best definition of hell is eternal separation from God. Why do we hear of pits and gnashing of teeth and flames and worms and stuff like that? So those are all physical ways of describing pretty much the worst experiences that you can imagine, is being eaten alive by worms and being burned to death. So those are the ways that the gospel writers describe trying to put human terms to complete separation from God. Should we expect that it's a physical place with physical flames, with a physical pit in the middle? We don't know. We can't say that. But we do understand that those descriptions are an attempt to help us to understand this separation of God in human terms, with our human language, and the limitations thereof. Any questions with that? So, who's in hell? Do you want to start listing people? So, we believe that people go to hell. We believe that you get the freedom to choose in this life, and if you choose to reject God, that is considered a sin that brings death to our soul, separation from God, and then that leads us to eternity apart from God, which we define as hell. So we do believe that people go there, that souls are in hell. But the reality is we don't, as much as we can say with certainty according to the heavenly realities that the church, we believe that Christ gives his church the ability to say with some level of authority, those who are in heaven, the saints, the canonized saints. We do not have the authority to say who is in hell. And that again is because of God's mercy. God's mercy is so overly abundant, and no matter how atrocious, no matter how rejecting, no matter how sinful is a particular life, we don't know those last moments. We don't know the state of their freedom of mind. We don't know the influences of external things upon the individual that would affect their freedom and their choice in some of the decisions that they make. And we don't know what happened at their last moments, whether they, in the final moments, turned back to God. And so we can't say Hitler, we can't say, Osama bin Laden or whoever you want to come up with. We can't say that person is in hell. We believe that there are souls in hell because that's what the scriptures lead us to an understanding of, and that's the teaching of the Bible, of Christianity. But the who, we do not say. Yeah, any questions with that? No? Last night I had all kinds of questions about hell. Oh, yeah.
So why is this world, our only world, or the only time that we can make a decision whether or not to accept or reject God?
So why can't you make that on into eternity, you mean? Is that what you're asking? Well, the matrix only goes so far. So, because, yeah, that's what we got. That's what Revelation leads us to, an understanding of how we are. What exactly is it about? Are you going to reference that question, or are you going to go? Right, so the choice was given to the angels, but it's sort of an instantaneous choice that, and again, in speaking about all of these things, there's a limitation of our ability to even speak about them because our language has a limitation of speaking only in reference to time and how we talk about things within the context of time. And because angels are pure spirit, they're not bound into the reality of time. And that's part of the reason why their instantaneous choice happened and that they don't change that choice, whereas we who are in the physical world of time have this lifetime to either live or reject God. Why are we given just a lifetime? It's above my pay grade, that question. Why is that the way?
Free will is a choice that you make, and that your mind and body would cease at the point of death, like your soul goes on, I guess. But, so how could you choose? How could you make a conscious choice and exercise free will when you're dead?
Say that again?
Well, so, to say why you can't choose after you die is because you no longer have free will. Like, you don't have the ability to make that choice.
Okay.
You have the whole entirety of your life, and you don't know when the end is, but in the end, I don't think you would still have any free will left. Because you don't have the ability.
Because the free will is bound into our physical human body in terms of the brain and the way. Yeah, I like it. I like it. I like it. Yeah, go ahead. Uh, Great question. So, first of all, Brandon, did you hear that response? I guess to me that gives it a little bit of context. The response that David had to question that bodies, but then obviously the next question goes on to the physical. Well, I mean, you can push that question further as well. Why did God give us the boundaries of our physical human bodies? Anyway, so I'm going to leave that question now. So, what about heaven? Are we married in heaven? So the reality of the sacraments, first of all, is that the sacraments are for us in this life to point us to God. They're physical, tangible, touchable things that direct our sights to God for eternity. So they are actually for us in this world. So technically the sacraments are for the living. They're not for the dead. And so in a sacramental way, we are no longer bound by the bond of marriage after this life. Bound. Sorry. I just saw the married couple look at each other like so distracted. But anyway. So now, does that mean that you won't recognize or know your, beloved in heaven, or that there's no relationship or interaction? Certainly, the images that we have of the book of Revelation, of all of the victorious together, seems to speak to a reality of some kind of human interaction in the next life. And, we understand and hope that we will know and love in the way that we do here, but it won't be the same as the sacramental love of marriage is in this life. The next question is, what about Rover? Is Rover up there? You know your brother, Rover? No. So stupid. I've had way too much coffee tonight. Is Rover in heaven? So do our pets go to heaven? I've heard responses both directions on that. Because animals don't have the same souls that we do. They don't have immortal souls as humans. That we believe that we're given souls that go on for eternity. That some have argued that your pets die and they don't go anywhere except for the ground. But then there's others who argue that heaven is a completion, a fulfillment of a new heavens and a new earth, and so that all of creation is completed in heaven, which would then imply that all of the parts of creation are also in some way fulfilled in heaven. So then one could push that to mean that, all the parts of creation in some way will exist with us in heaven, which includes plants and animals and T-Rexes, is that what you said? T-Rexes, come on, T-Rexes, you better be there. And what else? Poisonous snakes? All of them. So.
Yeah, wouldn't they be in hell though?
T-Rexes?
No, the bad ones. Like the things that could harm you. There shouldn't be anything that could harm you.
Yeah, but then you could, anything could technically harm you. That's an interesting conversation. Yeah, did you have a question? It's not my wife, it's our wives.
It's
And there we find the danger of speaking in that way. No.
Like, if that's the fulfillment of all our desires,
Right.
then why
That we
would
won't be drawn as much into the human attachments because we won't need the human attachments because the fulfillment of all our attachments would be that relationship with God. In some way, we would speak that way because the sacraments, are for us, powerful as they are limited to this life. And so in some way that, I think we could say that. Just write that down, basically. So Father was teaching us that heaven, everybody's wife is everybody else's wife. So, anyway, no, I didn't say that. That was Brandon. So, we got to move on to purgatory. What is it? So in relationship to the fires of hell, the fires of purgatory, we see angels drawing this image of a movement in purgatory, whereas hell is typically static. There's not movement in any direction in hell. Speaks to the reality of what we understand purgatory to be. That first question of what is purgatory, is rooted in, we don't find that word in the Bible, so where do you get that idea, first of all? Again, I think I mentioned this last semester, but if we take that argument to its conclusion, there's certain things also, if that's our only stipulation, is the only criteria for a teaching, is that it be found, that word be found in the Bible. And there's other teachings of the church, of Christianity, that need to be thrown out as well, which would be like the Trinity. That word's not found in the Bible. Incarnation of Jesus Christ, that those words are not found in the Bible. Those are all principles and teachings that all Christians hold, yet those words are not found. Obviously, the teaching, the understanding of it is found, and so too we believe purgatory is referenced as a, and what does that mean? Purgatory comes from the word purgatio, purgation, which means purification, purified. So is it a second chance for sinners? It's like I really didn't get my act in order when I was living, so thankfully there's purgatory so that I can finally achieve my salvation. Or is it just sort of this in-between place? It's like I'm not good enough for heaven, but thankfully I'm not in hell, so like I'm in between. So what exactly, where does this idea come from? So one passage that we first look to is 1 Corinthians 3:10 and 11:15. According to the grace of God given to me, like a wise master builder, I laid a foundation and another is building upon it. But each one must be careful how he builds upon it, for no one can lay a foundation other than the one that is there, namely Jesus Christ. But if someone's work is burned up, that one will suffer loss. The person will be saved, but only as through fire. So this understanding of the possibility of coming to salvation, a salvation that comes as a result of only passing through fire. The image is also used in the Bible of as gold in the fire, we are made perfect. So as a refiner would place the gold in the fire to remove any imperfections upon that gold so that it would be the purest of gold, so too do we understand purgatory as being a means of preparing us for the complete and utter perfection of heaven. So going on with our understanding of it, we look to 1 John. This distinction, first of all, as I mentioned, 1 John 5:16-17 talks first about the distinction of sin. So if anyone sees his brother sinning, if the sin is not deadly, he should pray to God, and he will give him life. This is only for those whose sin is not deadly. There is such a thing as deadly sin, about which I do not say that you should pray. All wrongdoing is sin, but there is sin that is not deadly. So holding that in our minds, first of all, that there is a distinction of sin. Sin that brings death to our soul, death, which is Other translations of the Bible use the word mortal, mortal meaning death. So sins that bring death, that's where the understanding of mortal sin comes from, and then all other sins. So that distinction, first of all. So there is venial sin, which means sin that can be pardoned, and mortal sin bringing death. Then in Revelation we read, He took me in spirit to a great high mountain and showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. The treasure and wealth of the nations will be brought there, but nothing unclean will enter it, nor anyone who does abominable things or tells lies. Only those will enter whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. So we read in the book of Revelation that nothing unclean, nothing impure shall enter into heaven. Okay? All sin is impurity, even venial sin. Those who die with mortal sin go to hell because they've been separated from God by their choice in committing that sin. So what happens to those with venial sin? We say venial sin does not bring about death, as St. John specifies. So what about those who die with sin on their soul, venial sin upon their soul? It is impurity. It's imperfection. It's missing the mark, as we talked about. And we can't go to heaven with impurities, imperfections upon our soul. And so that is this understanding of purgation, being purified so as to enter into heaven. It's not a place for those who didn't cut it. It's not a second chance. Every single soul that enters into purgatory is saved. So it's not like a time period where we kind of maybe get another chance to be judged. But every soul that passes through the purgation, purification, is saved in terms of their relationship with Jesus Christ. But it is that time of preparation. Many of the saints talked about it as being something that after we die, in seeing the great beatific vision that St. Thomas described having seen, they didn't want to enter into that purified relationship until first they received the purification. So they desired purgation for themselves, because seeing their own even little imperfections before entering into that purest of relationships with God for eternity, desired purgation. Okay, so another way that we understand purgatory to be referenced is the understanding of prayers for the dead. So in 2 Timothy we read, "May the Lord grant mercy to the family of Onesiphorus, because he often gave me new heart and was not ashamed of my chains. But when he came to Rome, he promptly searched for me and found me. May the Lord grant him to find mercy from the Lord on that day." So this family, this relationship with this individual, and the fact that he's speaking of him in past tense, the fact that he's speaking of God's mercy to be upon him, that he has died, and that he offers a request, a prayer for God's mercy to come upon this friend who has died. So prayers for the dead. We also see references to praying for those who have died, praying for God's mercy for those who have died in the Old Testament, in the second book of Maccabees. Well, okay, what does that prove? What does that show? Prayers for the dead. Well, first of all, why would you pray for somebody who has died? If they're in heaven, they're already in victory, so they don't have any need of God's mercy, obviously. There's no reason to pray for somebody who's already in heaven. If they're in hell, there's no changing course. There's no mercy upon those who are in hell. They're there for eternity because they've chose to reject God. So the implication is that there is a state of being after we die where prayers or mercy might be of benefit. So praying for those who have died brings about that understanding, that implication that there is a place where those prayers would be of benefit, a state of period purgation, of purification, and we call that purgatory. Questions at this point? Yes.
So when you say that those with mortal sin, they go to hell,
Yes.
I mean, can you be saved from mortal sin?
Excellent. Good segue, because I never did get into the definition of what makes a sin a mortal sin. So there is a distinction that follows that, as we understand, as we saw, first letter of John talks about this distinction of deadly sin and non-deadly sin. It also needs to be, there's a couple of points that need to be a part of that decision to sin in order for that sin to have that effect on us. So we believe in God's mercy to the point that if you didn't know, then God's not going to hold you accountable for something that you were not given the knowledge of. And so not only does it have to be serious, so the sin has to be serious, of grave matter, which typically is the listing of sins mentioned by St. Paul. I think it's in Corinthians. It might be Colossians. But he has the traditional listing of the sins. Also, the Ten Commandments are sometimes used as those which are of grave matter. But so you have to have full knowledge of them being serious, first of all. So if you were raised in a family where they did bad things, whatever, there was serious sin, they were raised in a family where you didn't have the knowledge, you weren't given the knowledge, and were not held responsible for that knowledge. Anyway, I won't go in deeper there because that actually touches on some moral law stuff, but I'm not going to go there. And then, so we had to have full knowledge, and you also have to have the freedom to choose. You're not going to be held responsible if you weren't ever given a choice to choose, or if your freedom was impinged or hindered. So, for example, if somebody is holding a gun to your head, basically saying to do something, that hinders our freedom, and that affects the culpability, the responsibility that we have for the decision. So those are the three characteristics that make up a sin that we believe then is a mortal sin. Because without these two things, just doing something bad is not enough. That there also needs to be the knowledge of it being something bad and the freedom to choose it, that we are then held responsible for it, and that relationship is severed. Back to your question, is there any returning from mortal sin? Yes. So there is no sin that's outside of God's mercy. The Scriptures speak to that. In fact, there's only one unforgivable sin, the sin against the Holy Spirit, which, what does that mean in the context? It's basically a sin that's not confessed, or a sin that's, the only sin that's without forgiveness is the sin that's not brought to God, basically. That's how we understand the sin against the Holy Spirit, is a sin refused to allow the Holy Spirit to lead us to bring back to God. So that's the only sin that's outside of God's mercy, outside of God's forgiveness. So all mortal sins are forgivable. We are able to be forgiven for mortal sin as well. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the sacrament of reconciliation, because we believe that is one of the tools given to us by God as a means of the forgiveness of grave sin, of mortal sin. But I'm not going to go into that just yet.
If you were serious, that verse that you're talking about is 1 Corinthians 6, 9 to 10.
1 Corinthians 6, 9 to 10. I know there's a couple of different lists by St. Paul. Did you Google that, or did you look it up? You just found it? Okay. Anyway, I'm not going to look at those, or you can look at those if you want. Yes? They're like what? Suffering. Yes, so some saints describe purgatory as hell, but with hope, because those who are experiencing it are experiencing. It's often used the same words are used to describe it, fire, so that it is suffering as a means of being purified in the flames, but it comes with the hope of the fact that we are in relationship with God, and we have not rejected God. So, does that answer? Yeah. Intercede. Is what now? What?
Who could pray for you to get out of purgatory?
Is it people in purgatory? So, I mean, we do believe in the same way that we speak of the saints, that even those in purgatory we can intercede for each other. It's not like in purgatory you're sort of cut off from the relationship of our connection of baptism. So, all Christians in this life who are living are connected to each other. When we pass on from this life, both through purgatory and in heaven, we're connected to each other, and so that's part of the reason we ask for prayer. So technically, even those who are in purgatory, you can ask them to pray for us as we pray for them, all of us connected together. But also we pray through we obviously ask those who are in heaven to pray for us as well. How does that work? How do we understand that those prayers are answered and that communication? That gets into a question that we can't physically define because it's outside of physical experience. Yeah.
So once we die, we're like outside of time with like no change. So how can you go from one point to
Yeah, exactly. That's the challenge of speaking of the places of heaven and the places of hell and the state or the place of purgatory, and the fact that you go to purgatory for a temporal amount, basically for a time, and so that's why a lot of the theologians that write about purgatory are try not to refer to it as a place, and how oftentimes the traditional understanding of a period of time and our understanding of periods of time don't exactly grasp it. But yeah. So that's why, anyway, I'll leave it at that. I think he was first, and then we'll come back here.
Like, you're in purgatory, is it like an active thing as the soul in purgatory, or is it sort of like a car in a car wash being pulled through, and everybody in purgatory sort of ends up in the same destination, or do you make a choice in purgatory?
Yeah, so there's no active, mind-changing type stuff. Like, I think that's part of maybe that previous question about free will and the choices that we make are in this time-constrained life, and that after this life that we don't choose in the same way. We're not in the body, at least not in that initial stage of purgatory. What was the other part of the question?
That was pretty good.
Okay.
Sort of like, if you're in purgatory, then you still end up in hell, or if you're in
No.
purgatory, you're going.
Right, yeah. So everybody who goes to purgatory is basically the stage. Again, stage implies time and layers of time. So, but it is that can't say period, but state. Sorry? An avoidable detour? Yes. So yeah, you could in the state of grace, in the state of perfection, sidestep purgatory and not have a need for purgatory. But it's for those who have imperfections, impurities upon their soul. Did you still have a question?
So if it's outside of like the realm of time, that means like equally applicable to like pray for first-century Christians, so someone who's died last week.
Yeah, in a sense, like.
No, like time limit, you can only pray from.
Yeah, right. They expired. Their prayer time expired. So sorry you missed it. But yeah, in some sense, we would say yes to that. Yeah, that's what I love about heaven, hell, and purgatory is as I started off by saying, as much as we try to define and put parameters on it, as much as we try to fully understand, and we should study but there's certain elements that are just going to be left mysterious, and so it does make it challenging.
Talking about purgatory being avoidable. So like, if you get like your last rite, or like if you die after you have given a confession or something like that, is that avoiding purgatory, or is that would you still go through a purification because you?
Right. So if you are purified through sacramental grace prior to dying, then we believe that you would go straight to heaven. So go ahead.
Okay, when people die, we hear people say things like, the skills are with us. You know what I'm saying? Is that just to comfort us, or is that, do we really believe that, like, they're here to just not see them? You know what I mean? Like, people saying, like, they're still with you, or they just mean, like, memory of them is still with us.
I guess I would see there being two separate realities there. Is that in some way we don't know that transition of the spirit, of the soul. So we don't know the exact timeline of the soul in terms of leaving the body, transitioning outside of time into purgatory, into heaven. So we don't know the exact timing of there. So there is an allowance for some interaction with souls. Now, we don't believe in souls being trapped in a house for, the rest of time, like as a which some Hollywood movies would lead to believe, like this person was murdered there and their soul just remains there. So we don't understand that, but we do believe that there are stories of that we would allow for within our understanding of theology, that for some reason, some way, there was an interaction or a vision of somebody after they died, whether it was in a dreamlike state or whether it was some experience. So we do allow for that understanding of after death. But then even beyond that, is there some way that we're interconnected as human beings and as Christians in a more spiritual, removed sense? I would think we would say yes to that as well. And again, that's not going to be a quantifiable, physical rule necessarily. But so I guess I would speak to that in two ways. If that makes sense at all? No, you're partially kidding.
What if people leave through the baptism? If they were baptized, you're baptized, you're connected.
As the body of Christ. Yeah, is it only then those who are baptized that we're connected to? I think we're connected in a greater way. In some ways, all of creation is connected, whether baptized or not. So if you're looking for a definitive answer, I'm not giving you one. Not tonight. I lied to you. last week. Just to get you, it's a venial sin. So, was there another question? Did you have a question, Alex? Oh, did I see a hand? I thought I saw another hand. No, we're good. Maybe I saw somebody who had just died. Anyway, what was I going to say? So moving on, next week we actually will fill out those forms. The forms that I made reference to, the information form that will have both if you are being baptized or not, if you had been baptized or not been baptized. Again, reminding you from last week that if you have been baptized in another denomination, I'll still need some kind of whether certificate or proof of baptism, and then also the sacramental or the confirmation saint name will go on that form as well. So if you haven't had the chance or taken the chance to research that a little bit of a saint that maybe connects with you in some way or that you feel a connection with, you might do that before next week.
You had also said those who are on the path to sainthood or
Yes. So the question came up, what about like those who are blessed, like they're not canonized as saints, but they have been beatified as blessed, which is the step before canonization. Technically, that would be allowed too. That came up because there's a couple of Kansas individuals, one in particular, Father Emil Capon, who is on that path, who would be a legitimate saint's name. So, any other questions? Yes.
Say like your baptism records you digging up and like
They're underground?
yeah.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And they're on their way to be mailed. They don't get to the Thursday. Like they can't find it for a while, and then by the time they mail them to you, it doesn't get here until Thursday. And with the mail,
Like this next Thursday?
yeah.
Yeah, sorry. There's nothing we can do for you. No. Yes. No. Yes. I would. Yeah. Obviously, as long as I know that there's something coming and it gets here before Easter Vigil, basically. But I hate even saying that because then wait till the week before. But anyway, definitely, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. Okay. Good. Do we have prayer leaders?
one more. You need a physical copy or is digital?
Oh, yeah. So a digital copy, like a scan, would work too, actually. So if they can scan a copy of your baptismal certificate and I can have a scanned copy, that would be awesome. That work. Does that answer your question? Can I look up your finger?
Christ the Lord,